And alrighty, folks, thanks for clicking on this video. James Cards FC here, and today I'm going to be joined by United States men's national team soccer cards. He's either right above me on the screen right here, or probably the way this video is uploaded right over here on this corner. But yeah, you've probably seen his account both on YouTube and Instagram. He actually has a pretty big following, especially in comparison to mine. But yeah, glad to have you on the program today. This is going to be the second creator chat that I'm calling it. And yeah, so feel free to go ahead and give the people that perhaps don't know you or don't follow your stuff an opportunity into what you've been working on in content creation and sort of what's going on your end.
So my name's Alec, aka USMNT Soccer Cards. Personally, really big on US soccer cards. Also love vintage and pre-modern goats. A little bit of both on my channel. Personally, I really enjoy analytics and the data behind soccer cards and how that plays off of each other with the market. So usually it's focused around that. Sometimes focus in USMNT results, performance, player cards, stuff like that. I also try to be an informative mouthpiece for the market and the community to help promote soccer cards and, bring it a good name. So really that's what I'm about. As far as my Instagram, it's mostly just posting USMNT because that's what I feel like, the market needs to an extent. But outside of that, I do like to delve into everything and try to be as well versed as possible. Really, for me, the only thing I don't really do a ton of is prospecting, mostly because I'm bad at it. So I just collect and, mess around with USMNT players since that's what I know, and usually to stick to exactly that.
Yeah, perfect. And so a lot of those topics you bring up, like the U.S. men's national team, of course, prospecting or the lack thereof, pre-modern and vintage, all that kind of stuff is sort of the way I've built out the topics for today's videos. And so the first one I want to get into is just the first one that I pretty much ask anybody that comes onto the channel, or I'm going to be asking anybody that comes on the channel, is just a general, what's on your mind right now? And we'll try and ignore the U.S. men's national team on field for now, because we'll obviously cover that in more detail here in a second. But in terms of the card market, what's really on your mind right now?
I mean, it's got to be World Cup, and obviously it's beyond World Cup. It's what does the World Cup look like as we get into this? Because I feel like, it could go either way, either everyone's been waiting for it and stacking all their cards and they want to sell a bunch because they might need the money, or at the same time, I also see tons of people I've never seen post about soccer cards, soccer stickers. They start to get into it with the World Cup albums. And so you can kind of see both things happen. And so I'm really interested to see how the World Cup plays out, what players, what teams, really just how the market overall grows. But also then after that, I am just a little cautious in the sense of the whole hype is the World Cup. And then usually the hype is the Champions League. And we know within 5 months after the World Cup's done, we'll be in a summer that is going to be probably, pretty dry in terms of the market. So for me, I'm just really focused in on that, trying to have fun with it, but also mitigate anything that I think could be problematic within the 3 to 4 month span post World Cup. But overall, it's the first World Cup that almost all of us are in this market for. So I just think that sitting back and seeing how it plays out will be a ton of fun, and it'll give us a lot of things to go off of as we head forward. I'd imagine that's probably what you're excited for as well. It's really a big gamble. There's no way to know,
Yeah, of course, with the World Cup coming up, and I believe we're around 50 days, at least from time of recording, from the first match kicking off. And so, yeah, that's always going to be top of mind. And what you bring up there is really interesting. At least in my opinion, it feels right now like a really cautious time to be buying in the market, unless you're specifically targeting things like the pre-modern and vintage goat market, or things that aren't really volatile in terms of player performance. I think that sort of stuff is less risky right now, but the risky stuff is anybody that has any sort of built-in expectations, especially revolving around the World Cup. I think now is a pretty dangerous time to be playing that sort of short-term flip game, because I really don't know what the outlook is for this World Cup. I've gone back and forth of, I think a lot of people are going to sell off before the World Cup, so we might not get that big spike that we're looking for. But of course, a bunch of casuals could come into the market based on how different players perform and buy up their cards, and the whole market could go up 20, 30%, or just on key guys, maybe it goes up 100 or 200%. We just have no idea. And so on the ultra modern side, I'm pretty cautiously going into this World Cup, specifically more trying to target guys that I'm confident will be valuable after the World Cup, not so much just dependent on what happens in Qatar. But yeah, I think it's an exciting time to be in the market, but it's also kind of a nervous time in terms of I'm not really sure where it's going to go. And like you bring up, after the World Cup ends and we get into that lull between World Cup is now over, we got to wait another 4 years for the next one. Champions League will still be going, but a lot of the players that feature in the World Cup probably won't be going deep into the Champions League. So what happens to those guys as we go forward, I think is really interesting. And so I liken it to, this is like we're going out to the Halloween store as Halloween is coming, but once Halloween's over, what happens to the Spirit Halloween stores? They just go away, right? They pop up in August and September, and then by the end of October/November, they're gone. And so I wonder if that's going to be the case for soccer cards, at least in the short term, specifically talking about those ultra modern active players.
No, yeah. I mean, with the ultra modern specifically, it'll be a big deal. I think I'm curious as to what should we be looking out for besides just higher prices, right? To indicate that this is a better, like, long-term collectible in the sense that it's growing, right? With the recent, if you guys have seen the Andre video with Jesse, he says at the end that, he thinks soccer cards are going to be the next big thing, basically. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be something that we can tell beyond just prices. I just don't know how we can see where that's coming from. I don't know if they all, usually people enter in through ultramodern and then work backwards. But I do wonder with soccer if it's going to be a little bit different in the sense that typically soccer fans are, pretty understanding of their history for the club or for whatever they support. And so the months following the World Cup, I think, will be really a telltale sign of where this market's at. And so as much as the World Cup is exciting, I'm also really curious as to what follows and really what we should be looking out for. Because, I mean, again, this is the first time any of this is happening. So you have really nothing to go off of. Everyone just going in blind and looking to see where the chips fall at the end.
Yeah, exactly. And if things do get significantly discounted, especially if we talk about the more pre-modern and vintage stuff, I mean, I personally will be very closely monitoring things like that because my thesis in general for long-term investing in this sort of a market will not change no matter what happens in Qatar and no matter what happens in the months after Qatar. If vintage and pre-modern takes a 50% dip afterwards because nobody really cares about soccer anymore, that doesn't change my long-term view of it at all. And so I think, and I hope, well, I don't hope that things take a big crash, but if it does, I think it's going to create an interesting buying opportunity if you're specifically looking at this from a long run, 5, 10, 15 years down the road sort of thing.
No, one thing I wanted to throw in as well with what I'm thinking about and what gets me excited, in the market is I've seen a lot of FIFA people into the space already. Like, yep, Castro has an account, there's plenty of others that have accounts in the space. And I thought that was going to take a lot longer. Like, that was in my perspective, I thought that was going to be like a 5, 10, 20 year type time frame thing. So seeing those guys get in at this point, it makes me optimistic. I don't know what their intent is or, where this goes from here, but I think that that's massive because as far as eyeballs on soccer cards, I mean, just to show you how crazy the market is, I mean, obviously, you were here, but for the people that didn't, like the Prism boom of 2020 August, like that was just casual other collectors getting into it a little bit. And that was enough to basically light the whole thing on fire. And not to say that that's going to happen again or when it happens, but I think holistically long-term, you could, sort of see the same type of thing if people really do take to it. And so that's been something that has made me really eager to see where the market goes. And it's made me believe in a lot more, I guess, in the base of what will be here. Because obviously, there are people that intend on being here for a good amount of time at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And what you bring up about the audience sizes of those guys is just massive when you compare it to so the more hardcore soccer card channels probably have maybe a few thousand subscribers when they're large, right? We're talking about FIFA streamers that have maybe a few 100,000 or at the maximum maybe 1 million or just short of 1 million. And a guy that I used to watch a lot when I was really deep into FIFA was Run the Fut Market. Obviously, he had a huge channel. He breaks product, not regularly, but he does break product. And when he does that, he's getting 20, 30, 40, 50,000 viewers on random product breaks. And so all that sort of exposure is obviously a great thing if they want to get deeper into it. And I'm sure some people that watch it will get deeper into it. That's always just a great sign for our market.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I mean, just again, with like how much usually those streamers or, creators, you can tell like they've been doing FIFA for a long time. So it seems that this stuff would take and be somewhat that they continue with and continue to have fun with. And honestly, just, I don't know, it's very encouraging, but at the same time, I just didn't expect it this soon. And so I don't really know how to take it, because that's one of the long-term catalysts that I assume to be baked into the market. That's now, I mean, it's not gone. They'll continue to, interact, I'd imagine, but it's just something that is a little bit more off the table than it was. And I don't know if you're into Ultimate Team trading, or if you were did you ever do any Ultimate Team flipping?
Yeah,
trading?
I was super deep on it, and when I was in college.
Yeah, I personally big fan as well. Love that stuff, but FIFA started getting really crazy with the amount of cards that they were producing, and
kind of like modern.
Yeah, I was going to say there are some similarities, but yeah, I mean, when you look at how many people, I'd follow accounts that would be into like really, really into trading and stuff like that, and they'd have 50, 100,000 followers on platforms just for specifically trading cards, and those types of people are starting to get into it too, and that. I just think that all that's great. And at the same time, I also, didn't expect it to be this soon. So it's all kind of fun. I'm interested to see how the World Cup plays off that, because really it's two different potential catalysts that we have to see balance out. And so I think it'll be a ton of fun beyond obviously just the games. I mean, 50 days away, every day I wake up, I have a whiteboard behind me where I change the day of like, how many days till the World Cup, because it's so fun. At least for me as an American, it's what most of my soccer history goes back to. I don't have a lot to look back to. I don't have really a club team that I support. That's why I'm so big on the US. And so just to be able to write another chapter in that book, I'm definitely excited.
Yeah, no, there's nothing that can make me not excited about eventually getting to watch these matches, no matter how bad the U.S. men's national team ends up looking in friendlies or whatever's going on. It doesn't make me any more or less excited to watch every single second of every single broadcast for pregame, postgame, the whole match in Qatar. So yeah, no, definitely going to be excited for that. You brought up the content creators in the FIFA space and sort of their evolution as they maybe grow out of FIFA and move into some different categories and stuff like that. And so I was going to pivot for a second and talk about your content creation and your journey that you went on to sort of get to this point where you're at now and the types of videos that you're making these days. So where did you sort of start out, and what led you to making the type of content you're making now? And where do you see that changing in the future? Or do you think you found what you're looking for in terms of content?
So for me, I started originally when I got into the hobby. I think I did what most people do, which is, you're American, so you buy some football, you buy some basketball, you buy the Prism because that's what everyone's talking about. So I bought some of that stuff, and then pretty quickly I looked into soccer because I was a soccer fan, and so I saw, the massive difference that we all see, and I was like, well, I'm going to get out of that. So initially my content was actually more soccer, football, or I guess not soccer, but more football, basketball focused. And soon after that, I transferred out of that. Primarily, I do like basically building a more educational type channel on what you need to know about soccer cards, because as much as I think it's the fun part about soccer cards, if you're someone new getting into it, it's a really daunting task. When you go over to basketball, it's like, all right, you got Prism, you got Topps Chrome, you got Topps, and like, somewhere in between there's other stuff, but that's basically it. Like with soccer, it's a whole new world. So from my perspective, I'd like to be the guy that sort of ushers in US collectors, because oftentimes I feel like we're not really soccer. I mean, obviously we're not really soccer collectors, but if people want to be, they have to learn the intricacies of soccer that don't exist elsewhere. And it's usually a big jump. So I try to bridge that as much as I can. For me, I've always enjoyed analytics. Like I talked about earlier, I'm a big math guy. And so that type of stuff just brings me a lot of joy, a lot of fun. I enjoy making videos on it. So as much as I will try to usher in people at this point, I'm going to also switch into more analytic type stuff. In the future, I would like to make a Slab Stocks-esque account for Instagram. As much as I love what they do in the sense of, being able to provide, talking points and graphs that help inform people, I do think with soccer, they do a poor job at representing the whole soccer market. It's made for engagement, like most social media accounts. It's made for what the people are talking about now. And while that is useful, I'd like to, build out something where it's more holistic and more of a long-term thought process or midterm thought process, not every day we're changing up to something new, crazy that's going on. So as far as my channel, I think that's where I'm going to start to pivot into I don't really want to do a lot of it pre-World Cup because then it seems like I'm doing it in hopes to boost the World Cup. So, I want to do it post-World Cup, but really I would like to bring some more analytical and just thought-provoking items to American collectors, really is kind of my goal.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And there's definitely a space in the content sort of consumption community that's out there that really wants this sort of deeper content, the more analytical deep dives, and is looking a little bit past what everybody's just looking at on a daily basis in terms of hype and the new sets and all that. And they want something a little more grounded and holistic in looking at everything. And what you brought up about the educational aspect is huge, because when you come into the market, when you're first starting out, it is overwhelming how many different sets, how many different things are going on in the market. There's ultra modern, there's pre-modern, there's vintage. They all have different rules, stickers, cards. The soccer market is probably more complicated than any of the other markets out there, and there's the least amount of content about it. So the educational aspect is huge. It's something that I started to do a series of 6 or 7 videos consecutively where I was trying to lay out specific educational content for, hey, you're just starting on the market. Here's how you look to buy cards. Here's how you can sell cards. Here's the platforms you can use. And then here's like some really basic understandings of some different sets. Now that content is, I'm not going to lie, it's tiring to do, to go through and process out exactly how to get started in the market. But it's the type of content that, as we go forward into the future, is going to be consumed by people that need that sort of a step and an entry into the market where there really isn't an entry base for them, at least not currently. It's just really tough to start from zero and get to a spot in the market where you're not just thinking to yourself, man, am I burning money buying this card? Because I think we've all done that when we first get in the market.
Oh yeah, definitely. Whenever you enter, they're gonna be your worst purchases by far. I mean, there was a guy recently in the soccer study Discord that was kind of, showing us like terrible purchase after terrible purchase, and everyone was like, cool it. And it happens to everyone, especially in soccer. And that's the big thing, is you want to try to educate people in soccer before they get burnt and continually get burnt. Because in soccer, again, like you mentioned, there's just so many options and there's so much stuff, and all of it looks unique and cool, and it's too much to make sense of. And I feel like what we've seen with a lot of cards and card markets is the more the market is educated and understanding of what's out there, the more you can kind of nail that stuff down. Typically the better off you'll be long term, because then people know what they're getting into and they know how to go from there. So for me, I find that to be pretty important. Especially, I always feel like this guilt, as we're both Americans in soccer, you always get the, Americans don't care about soccer, they don't know soccer. So I want to try to help them.
I got that today on Instagram, by the way, because I said, I made a comment on somebody's post. I think it was UK Soccer Cards post. He posted about the Marcus Rashford 1/1 Prism that sold for 20 grand in 2020. And people in the comments were like, this makes no sense. Why was he selling for so much money? And all this nonsense about how overpriced he was. And I posted in the comments, hey guys, I'm not sure if you guys were around the market during this time, but like Marcus Rashford was one of the top 3 to 5 prospects that there was. And I got 3 or 4 different British people telling me, I don't know football. Marcus Rashford's not a good prospect. He was never as talented as all these guys that are currently here right now. And I was like, whoa, let's take a step back. I'm saying he was the hottest prospect because of the Americans that were on the market pushing that he was a good prospect. You're correct. On a football ability, he is not like the top 5 prospects that we have now, but the market was so different back then that a guy like him, just because the Americans were so like, I don't want to call them dumb, but they were like sillily optimistic on pretty much every player could be the next Ronaldo. And since he was like the young star for Manchester United, that sort of got placed on him, and his prices went berserk at that point.
Yeah, the Man U tax is definitely going to kill you, just like it does with most players, And yeah, I'd like to try to mitigate that as much as I can. And I saw your post. I didn't see you get murdered by other, Europeans, but I can imagine it. It happens a lot. So
yeah, I got 2 or 3 comments telling me that I didn't know football because I thought Marcus Rashford was a good prospect. And I was
God
like,
forbid you say soccer too. And then
exactly. But yeah, no, it's just par for the course when you're an American in the market, and so trying to get that good step forward and make sure that you're representing well, right?
Yeah, we got to try to help them out.
All right,
just a little bit.
Yeah, so with that, we'll move into the meat of the video that people will probably want to get to. And while you're on, we're going to talk US men's national team, not specifically cards, but we'll talk about the team as well here. And so the first question to ask is obviously a 2-part question. 1, what was your immediate reaction when you watched these recent friendlies? And 2, what's your reaction now that it's been a few days since and maybe your opinions might have changed?
So obviously this window was, I mean, other than Japan maybe killing us like 4 or 5-0, it was as bad as it could have been. Like there was a lot of optimism surrounding the team. I know that we finished out qualifying pretty poor with the loss on the road, but the game didn't really matter. So you're like, whatever, we'll chalk that up to just kids being kids and, looking past it. But this last window, I've been someone that throughout this whole process has really been a downer on our coach. And I think whenever a team's bad, it's a default to hate the coach because that's the easiest thing to hate, And so in these games, I defaulted to that. I didn't like the coaching. The games particularly, I was just really discouraged because the whole process and the whole mentality of the team is to be a possession-based team, which already is a worse team relative to most, good teams, is a very optimistic strategy to say we're going to have possession, we're going to play in possession, because, like the quote goes, everything's fine until you get punched in the mouth, and then what are you going to do? And we didn't have anything, right? We didn't have second, third options. We just looked like a fish out of water, and that's what it was. And so for me, watching the games, I was just bored out of my mind. Like there was no optimism at all. Like
I literally fell asleep during the Saudi Arabia match. Like
I wish I would have.
Between the 10th and 30th minute, I was just out, and I don't think I missed anything.
And that was probably the better half. The second half was even worse. So I mean, just watching the gameplay, what really killed my optimism is that we can't, well, one, we're a possession-based team that can't possess a ball, but two, we're also going to play center backs that are both in the MLS. Obviously, this isn't our starters going into World Cup, but it might be. No one really, and that's another big question with the team, is a lot of teams, I'd imagine going into the World Cup, who 10 or like 9 or 10 of your guys are, maybe 11 if you're crazy, but who your lineup is, right? Like with the US going into game one, like maybe there's 6 lock starters, maybe 7. Like there's a lot of question marks. And so when you have a lot of question marks with player personnel, and the only thing that you were supposed to be able to hold on to was like the identity of the team, and the identity of the team doesn't work, well, then everything's blown up. There's nothing. You have nothing. And that's kind of where we're at. But I guess a few days out where I'm at now, I feel better because I couldn't really feel worse, right? Like I couldn't feel worse after those games. So now I feel a little bit more optimistic in the sense of when it was really on the line in qualifying. There was a time early in qualifying where Greg's job was like, people were talking about it like they always do, but they were really talking about it. Yep. And after that game, that's when Pepe saved him. And that's why Pepe has this, huge love affair with the fan base. And that's why Greg still brings him into camp, in my opinion, is because of what he did in qualifying. And so we had that. And then we had the Panama game at the end of qualifying. And so in the big games, we have turned up, which gives me optimism that maybe something come World Cup time can click. But, and this isn't anything shocking, it does come down to that first game. Because if we can't do good in the first game, first Wales, everything's lost, in my opinion, because then you got to go into the English game and expect something. And I think the best case scenario is that we go into the English game and we don't expect anything, but we hope, right? As a team, there's not that pressure then, right? If you go into that game needing a point, or by God, needing 3 points, then it's scary, right? And so from my perspective, it was terrible. It's gotten a little bit better, but I'm still not feeling great. Not at all.
So I echo pretty much the same sentiments. Like I said, fell asleep during the Saudi Arabia game, didn't really miss anything there. The energy levels of the team were just so down compared to obviously what we would hope to expect for the World Cup coming up. The tactics were less than ideal in terms of instilling any sort of confidence in the team. Just nothing seemed to be working, couldn't get anything going. Balls couldn't get from the defensive line to the midfield to anybody forward. I think Pepe he had 12 touches in the first half of the Saudi Arabia game, which was the lowest of any player on the pitch. So that just gives you an example of how much it was a difficulty to move the ball forward. So yeah, I'm not going to take too much from it. I will say, I'm still optimistic on the team's chances at clearing the group, assuming everyone is healthy. If Musa is back, and if Weah is back, and if Anthony Robinson are back, I really like our chances because I think we are the clear second best talent team in the group. And I think eventually that has to matter for something. No matter how bad we are tactically, I do believe, like you say, in the team in terms of when they have needed to step up, they have stepped up. And so I think to a certain extent that the talent can win through. They can just say, screw it, we're not going to run through the system. We'll just rely on our talent and we'll get this win if we need to get it. And so I hope that's what happens in Qatar, but I really do think we're going to need everybody on board. And I think Musa especially, I think, was the most key guy that was missing, and you can see a glaring hole when he is not on the pitch.
No, yeah, I mean, and as far as our midfield goal goes, that was just, a terrible watch, really. Like, McKinney is not the guy if you want to be a possession-based team to have anything build out through midfield. So that makes sense. I mean, he never really was that, so we were asking a lot out of him. But yeah, those two games showed how much we need either a Musa or a Reina in midfield, someone that can, move a ball and progress it forward and continue an attack. Because, like you said, it wasn't a fun game to watch. But beyond that, like, what was the most dangerous chance we had in either game? We didn't score at all, and the most dangerous chance was probably a Ferreira header.
Yep,
in the first match he threw over the bar. Like,
it was. I didn't check the expected goals on it, but I imagine the expected goals were at least a half goal on chance like that, if not higher.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was basically it. And so for me, that's what scared me. But again, if we're healthy, I don't have the same fear that I did in these games. Or if we have all of our guys, like, I think Tim Weah on a wing would have changed a lot. Yep. Because the problem that we run into is we play Pulisic and Reina on wings if they're both healthy, and they both want to be midfielders. Like, Reina wants to be a midfielder. He drops in. Pulisic, I don't know if he wants to be a midfielder. I mean, he does feel good cutting in, but he also wants the ball. So he's forced to cut in. And so we basically have two guys that are on the wing that then come back. And so we have one guy alone up top with no one serving him. And sometimes we even play Ferreira up there, and he's probably going to be our starter, and he's meant to drop in. So we have a whole team that's meant to drop in, and we don't do anything going forward. At least in these couple games, again, like you said, I wouldn't take too much out of it. I probably took too much out of it, which is why I think
everyone took a lot out of it. And so I just want to remind people that other national teams did play during this break, and they struggled as well. Our group combined, Group B, had one win in 8 friendly matches. Then now there were some draws in there, but there was one win.
I think it was Iran, Uruguay, wasn't it?
It was Iran, yes.
That's the one team that scared me a little bit. I didn't really watch their games. Some crazy diehard US fans were. I'm not watching that. I can barely watch our team at the moment. But yeah, the Iran performances scared me a little bit just in terms of results, but I have no clue what they're putting on the field, what the other teams are. And like you said, I do think that you could take that optimistic approach and just say that like we're not going to show a ton before the World Cup, especially in friendlies, I mean, and the guys that are playing, they don't want to get injured. They don't want to try too hard. They're also nervous that they're going to lose their spots. And so again, I don't think there's a ton that you can take away from it, but it definitely tampered whatever optimism, people might've had that was a little over the top. So I think it's good, actually.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the conversation around the team, especially given their lack of success in this window, has been the system itself and the players that Greg is starting and the positions that he's starting them in. And so I thought this would be a fun topic to go over. And I'll go ahead and go first, and then I'll give you a chance to go through it and get your thoughts together. But 2 different teams you got to put together. First would be your ideal 11 in whatever formation you think would be best for the team. Who is your ideal 11 and where's everybody playing? And then secondly, what's Greg's 11 when we play against Wales in the first match? So I'll go ahead and start, and we'll do our ideal 11s first. So I have it as Dest, Zimmerman, and any non-MLS or McKenzie center back pairing with him, and then Jedi as the back line. I have Adams and Musa as more of a center defensive midfield, also be able to move the ball on a pivot. And then I have a combination of Reina, Pulisic, and Aronson hovering in the higher midfield, and then Pifok at the very top. So give some more freedom to guys like Reina, Pulisic, and Aronson. Two of them are going to have to play more wing type roles, but I really would prefer to have either Reina or Pulisic be in the middle of that formation going forward. But that would be my ideal formation, a 4-2-3-1. With Musa and Adams being in those more defensive midfield roles. I would put McKinney in there, but I'm worried with his recent performances that I just don't think he inspires me as much as it gives me freedom to put Reina, Pulisic, and Aronson all on the field at the same time. So that would be at least my ideal 11. What would yours be if you could play them in any sort of formation you think would suit best?
So I usually think of this question in terms of a 4-3-3,
Yep.
just because that's kind of what we play. And so even if I want it to be my 11, I know it's always like it's going to be Greg's formation no matter what. So I barely ever think of it outside of that. I don't think you mentioned your goalkeeper.
Turner. I really hope that this has all been put to rest and Turner is the starting goalkeeper. He was the only bright spot of the entire window, and I cannot imagine a situation in which he does not start for us.
Okay, so I agree. My goalkeeper, I'd go Matt Turner. Center backs, I still want John Brooks. I don't care that Greg hates him. I still want John Brooks. If we're going to try to be a possession-based team, I want John Brooks. I want John Brooks and Chris Richards as my two. If you want to fill in Walker Zimmerman for one of the two, like probably will happen. That's fine. I'm cool with that. I do like the pairing of Dest and Anthony Robinson on the right and left. For midfield, I want Adams as our defensive midfielder. That's basically all we have. For the other two midfield spots, I'd go Reyna and Musa. They kind of negate each other in a sense that they're both very progressive and they have the same skill sets. I think Reyna's a little bit better with the final pass. Eunice is a bit more physical and better in the more defensive half. But that's what I would do midfield wise. Attacking three that's where it's really tough. I was always a Sargent guy at striker, but I think I'd go Pfalk just because whatever is going on. I mean, Sargent didn't get many minutes in this window, so I'm just going to take from that. He didn't impress. And I mean, he's been playing a lot as a winger for club. So I think as a striker, that makes sense to go with Pfalk. But again, I don't think we'll see that. And then as our wingers, I'd go Pulisic and Weah. Just because I think they offer two totally different things. And I think that Weah is almost a must start, in my opinion, just because, at least in the formation that we're playing, he is really the only one that offers a ton going forward. And he really did carry us throughout the last half of qualifying. We were really struggling for goals. And when he got chances, mostly because Ariola was injured, but when he got chances, he performed. And so I feel like that's the way I would go. Do you want to go first with Greg's lineup, or do you want me?
I'll go ahead and give you so this is a combination of what I realistically hope he runs as well as what I think he's going to do. So like I said before, I think Turner's a lock to be in net unless he's in some terrible run of form with Arsenal or Stefan turns out to be amazing over these couple of weeks.
I will say I heard rumors, and these are just rumors, but I heard rumors from like big ex-US players basically saying that Zach Steffen's still the starter in the eyes of Greg. And that wouldn't surprise me in the slightest, but I do agree that it shouldn't be. He scares me a lot.
Yeah, it would not surprise me if Steffen started, but I really think it should be Turner. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that cooler heads prevail and Turner ends up being the starter for us just because he performed so well during this window when everybody else was terrible. So he's the goalkeeper against Wales. And then I'm going to go with Dest, Zimmerman, Long, and Anthony Robinson in the back. I think that is the most realistic option. I know that Long has been rightfully criticized for his performance in this window, but I just don't see Greg going with any other center back pairing besides those two. They've been the center back pairing consistently for the past few weeks. So I can't imagine he'll pivot off of that, even though Long has looked pretty bad. So we'll see what happens there. In the midfield, I have Musa, Adams, and then either Aronson or McKinney. McKinney, depending on his form, and then Aronson, of course, depending on his form. I think whoever has a better form of those guys could get the nod, but I would say McKinney probably has the leg up there. But if Aronson's playing really, really well for Leeds, I don't know how you can leave him out of the 11. And then up top, it's the obvious Pulisic, Jesus Ferreira, and then Weah at the top. So Reyna starting on the bench, I think that's probably realistic in terms of his health as well as what Greg's going to do. And this is actually the exact same starting lineup that we had when we beat Morocco 3-0. And so I'd be fairly confident with this lineup, assuming all the guys I mentioned are healthy and Long doesn't completely derail the team.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, as far as what Greg's doing, I'd agree. I felt that given Aaron Long, that second game was wild. I like in terms of friendlies, at least try something new. Him not doing that shows me he has a lot of faith in him, or at least he wants him to be that guy. We did have CCV, Cameron Carter-Vickers, and Chris Richards both out for this window. So I do think maybe if they're both back in, they do something, but Richards is in the situation currently where he's not really playing at clubs. So it makes that a lot more, up in the air. And so if it's up in the air, he's probably not going to go with them. Yep. So there are obviously changes we both like to make, but I mean, as far as Greg, it's really, and this is what's, I guess, bothered me with Greg throughout his coaching tenures. He's so slow to make changes. And you see that in games too, because throughout all of qualifying, we were not a first half team. First half, we'd come out, we'd be lucky to get a goal, like lucky to get a goal. And second half, we'd come out and we'd look good, right? And that scares me because you don't have that time in a World Cup. If this young team goes down early, I don't know if they don't have the leaders to say, hey, we're still in this, we can still recover, we can change this, we can do that. I think what a lot of teams are aided by is obviously veteran leadership and the ability to say, hey, this isn't working mid-game, let's change it. And we don't have that. And I think the only player that did have that was John Brooks. And as a conspiracy theorist of Greg, I think that he got rid of John because that was the one person that had the ability to oppose him and say, like, something's wrong, or I'm not doing that. And so I just don't see who can step up in a time of need and say, let's change it. Mm-hmm. And that's what scares me with Greg, because he already doesn't change. Like, if you watch obviously you did, but for the other people, if they've seen the qualifying games, he doesn't even change substitutions until very late. Like, he's very apprehensive to do that. So as a team that needs to be willing to change and needs to be willing to adapt to what another team's giving them, he just scares me a lot. And the same thing goes with the lineups, but at this point I've accepted it, and whatever will happen will happen. And, we'll see how it plays out, but it does scare me a lot.
As bad as the team has looked and as down on the lineup as we are, I think we both agree that this team probably should make it out of the groups, all things considered, even with the struggles that we currently have.
No, yeah, I think so. I think it's percentage wise, it's probably like 50-65% chance somewhere in there. Like, it's not, I'm not, wildly optimistic, but to be fair, we've never been wildly optimistic going into group stages. Like, we've never gone into a group stage and been like, yeah, we're making it out. Like, we're not that type of team. So to be able to even feel that with a bad team, I feel like is a good sign of where we're at.
Yeah. So with that, what are your actual expectations for the team in Qatar? Do you think they clear the group? Do you think they're out in groups? And if they clear the group, they actually have what I would call a favorable matchup in the next round, depending on where they're positioned. You're going to get either the first or the second team that is in Group A, which is by far the weakest group in the tournament. So what are your thoughts on realistic expectations that you have for this team?
Yeah, for me, my expectation, I guess, would be a knockout stage game. Really, that's once we get there, I feel like that'll be if we do get there, that'll be the fun part, because once you get there, it's almost like anyone can win, to an extent. We've seen it before in other finals. Yeah, Croatia in 2018, you see that a lot going back. The 2002 World Cup for us, and even South Korea and all those types of teams. Like, you can make a run. So for me, a knockout stage game would be great. Like, that's once we get there, you obviously, like you said, you have that game. I know Netherlands and Qatar in that Group 1. I don't know. It's another African team, isn't it?
Netherlands, Qatar, Senegal, and Ecuador.
Okay. Yeah. So, I don't feel great just because I don't think we're a great team, but I do feel like we'll have a shot in anything. So
I'll feel better against that than I will against Brazil, Argentina, and teams of that like.
Oh, yeah. The other options are terrible. So I do feel like this set up for us. I also think the group stage is as fun as it could be, in the sense that we have two teams that we should at least perform equal to, if not better than.
We are clearly more talented than two of the teams in our group, and I don't think anyone would argue with that. The argument for Wales is they could be better tactically, and maybe Bale has some superhuman game, but I don't think anyone would argue that the US is not clearly the second most talented team in the group.
Yeah, and Bale has been struggling this year, so that's another good sign for us, at least going into this. But beyond that knockout stage, I have no expectations. I feel like it's really hard, because if you have expectations for them to do good in this knockout stage, I'm terrified of what your expectations are in 2026, because then you have obviously the home World Cup, but then you have the home cooking that goes on with that World Cup and the better players. And so to even have, I like to tamper my expectations for 2026. So to do that, I have to even lower my expectations for now. So yeah, for me, I'd be happy to see a knockout game. Is kind of where I'm at.
I think I would agree. And I hate to say that I'm very optimistic, but I am leaning towards more being very optimistic about us clearing the group, because for the reasons, like I said, we are so much more talented than the other teams in the group that should win out. Now, funny things can happen and we could get tactically exposed by the teams like Iran and like Wales. They could just completely tear us apart if Berhalter's being stubborn and they figure out his system and we're screwed. I could definitely see that being a thing. But from a talent perspective, we should have the talent to clear this group. And once we get out, like you say, anything can happen. I would be optimistic depending on if, as long as we avoid the Netherlands, any other team in that group, I think we would be favored over. But going further than that, I think is a joke, because at that point you're then playing against one of the top 6 or 8 tournament favorites, and there's just no way this team is near that level yet. As opposed to, I know that probably the general consensus on this team of people that aren't really in the weeds on it is this team should be like really good, right? Like quarterfinals or better good, and that's just not going to happen with this team.
Yeah, I feel like the way that a lot of I don't know if it's just, I don't know if the US contingency is too optimistic or people think we're too optimistic. It's one or the other. But I do think that the general consensus within the hobby is that this is a really good team. And it's not. It's a good collection of players compared to what we've ever had before. But it's not a great team. And you can't, I mean, I looked at the ages of everyone recently, and you do this from time to time, and they are all young. Even our oldest guys on the team, like
we're going to be fielding the youngest team at the World Cup.
Yeah. So, I mean, to be able to expect that to do great, I mean, even if, insert whatever perennially good team, if they had the youngest team ever, if Germany was coming in with the youngest team in the World Cup somehow, which would be hard to imagine, but even then you wouldn't expect them to go on to do great things relative to them. So I don't think you can expect that for us. And so I think it'll be a ton of fun, a great learning experience, and hopefully we can get as many games as we can, so then these guys can have that confidence going forward. And
yeah, definitely. I mean, based on what happens in that first Wales match will literally set up how I feel about the entire tournament. If we get 0 points out of it, I think we're completely screwed. But if we draw or win, I will be insanely optimistic about our chances.
No, I agree, because that first game, I mean, it's pretty obvious for everyone. It matters a lot. But for us, like going into the second game against England, you can't need a result there. If you need a result, that's a ton of pressure, and it's gonna weigh on the guys. And I don't think they did great this window with a ton of pressure, even though, it's friendlies and whatever. But it is what it is, hoping for the best.
Yeah, of course.
Expected not the best.
Really. And we'll remind ourselves that the real goal here is 26, and then again after that in 30 when our players will be in their later primes. But the future is much more bright than the present currently.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think that's what should be focused on.
Yeah, exactly. And so with that, I know we talked a lot about Greg, and given what's going on in the World Cup friendlies that just happened and then going into the tournament, what do you think it actually takes for him to lose his managerial position?
So I don't know. I've heard rumblings that like Greg doesn't necessarily love the job as is, just because Greg seems like a guy's guy, like a team's guy. They love him, a player's type of manager. And he seems to really like more of the club managerial style where you're with your players a lot more and can implement a system rather than, the international style where you get together every few months. So from what I've heard, I don't think Greg will be around a ton after the World Cup, but I could be wrong. Obviously, this is just through what I've heard. In terms of what it would take for him, I think if he doesn't get out of the groups, I think that should be enough to just to fire him. But I mean, he doesn't really have the connections much anymore, but he's very close with the United States Soccer Federation, which is how he got the job and one of the attributes as to how he got there. So I don't think that they'd be overly harsh. If he made it to a knockout stage and he wants to stay, I don't see why you wouldn't keep him. But if he does go out in the first round, especially if it's embarrassing, which it could be, then without a doubt, in my opinion, he's got to go. I've been someone that I've thought early on in the qualifying cycle, I was a Berhalter out type of guy. Yep. I've come off that, and I'm thinking about jumping back on, but I'm staying off. I'm waiting until we see what happens. But yeah, I think if he gets out of the group, that's great. If not, I don't want to see him. But that's just me.
Yeah, I think it's more of a matter of how we look at the World Cup more than it is results. If we're still running a very stubborn looking system and we're creating 0 chances and it just looks awful despite our talent, I think he's gone whether we struggle and barely make it out of the group or not. I think if it looks bad, we're just not gonna keep him around. But I'm not an anti-Greg guy. I'm a results-based guy, and so if he delivers, I am all fine with it. If we make the knockouts and God forbid we win a game, there's nothing you can do about it. Greg's going to be the guy. So from that perspective, I'll root for him until further notice.
Oh yeah, no, I root for the best for Greg. I don't hate him. Honestly, I like him because the players like him. Like if the players are that dedicated towards the manager, I don't know how I can't be. But obviously as a fan from time to time, it gets very frustrating seeing the same sort of mistakes. And there was a time during qualifying towards the end where I started to see his player personnel change a lot more to what people liked, what I liked, what the general consensus was. And at that point, I thought we turned a new leaf. And now during this last friendly window, obviously ton of injuries, ton of stuff up in the air, but it kind of went the other way. So now you're in this limbo really as a fan. And like you said, I think it just comes down to results. And I think most of that is the England game because obviously the other two matter, but if we go out and get embarrassed to England, I don't know how you come back from that. As far as top tier teams go, I don't think that highly of England compared to, the other, perennial top five that are out there. So if we come out and don't stand a chance, then in my opinion, that should be the end. But it is a lot to ask for a US manager to look good against England, but we have done in the past. So
yeah, no, I don't think it's wholly unrealistic, especially with England has manager drama just as much as the United States does. I mean, I cannot tell you how many people I've heard that want Southgate gone for a variety of different reasons. And so we're not the only ones with managerial struggles. But with that being said, we'll move back into cards here, but stick on the U.S. men's national team. I actually asked this question with Seth on an episode that's probably already aired by now. It's a buy, sell, hold, but with some more context than you would usually get in a buy, sell, hold. So we're going to do U.S. men's national team players, and you have to buy one right now and hold them through the entire World Cup. So a longer term guy. You have to buy one and sell one with the intention of selling it before the World Cup starts. And you have to buy one and sell one during the World Cup. Pick one player for each of those categories. Or if you have multiple, you can go ahead and name a few.
I got him. No, well, I guess I might have multiple. We'll see. So as far as the guy I would buy and hold long term, I mean, it just kind of works out right. I'm a big Gio Reyna guy. It's no question. I make that very obvious so people know that I'm, biased. But I think with the Gio Reyna injury right now and the long-term potential of him, I do think that that's where I'd probably go. Just because when it comes to the U.S. team, in my opinion, where you can get burnt is the fringe guys because they can easily be gone and then never discussed again. And I don't think Gio is fringe. Maybe time will tell and maybe he is, but right now he's not fringe. And so that's where I would go just because of the injury opportunity and the long-term hold. As far as the hold and then sell during the World Cup, I would go with Tim Weah. I think that if he gets a start on a wing, as far as our front three goes, our striker's a total gamble. You have no clue. Like no one has a clue. Maybe Greg, maybe. But as far as our strikers go, it's a total toss-up. So you can't really take a striker, and they're already expensive as is. Pulisic's expensive as is. So I think Weah, he's really cheap. I have a good amount of Weah. I have a good amount of the USMNT, so that's not really a secret. But
yeah, of course.
I like Weah, and I think that if he pops off during the World Cup, with that name and with just how good he looks at times, I think he could really be eye-catching to people. And as far as a buy now and sell in the lead up, I didn't dig too deep on this one because I don't really have a guy I'm doing that with. But I would say Pulisic would be the guy just because he's the name people know, right? If the average guy is getting into U.S. soccer cards, honestly, all they know is Pulisic. From what I can tell, they don't even know who Reyna is. They definitely don't know who our striker is because we don't. And so, maybe they've heard of McKinney, maybe. But I'm not that high on McKinney. I do think that Christian, he's not in the best club situation, but the name alone, I feel like, could give you opportunity heading up to that. But that would be my three. And if you have any ideas, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so I'm similar in thoughts on the last two that you named in terms of guys that I would be buying and trying to flip before the World Cup. Not that I'd personally be engaging in it. Obviously, it's just fun conjecture. And then a guy like Weah, I think is a perfect kind of guy to speculate on a little bit and then sell during the World Cup because he's specifically a World Cup guy. Like this is his opportunity.
His club situation's poor. Poor,
this is his opportunity to capture a market here, and I think that's a smart play. I also like Yunus Musa for that specifically because in his club situation, he's not going to be scoring a lot of goals. He's not going to be scoring a lot of assists, and his club's not all that popular. So this is a really good chance for him to have a few flashy moments and maybe due to its low populations, especially in PSA grades, there's something to that in terms of velocity. And then
Mhm.
I go really off the wall in terms of my buy and hold here. I think the best buy and hold right now is any of the guys that are on the U20s team currently, because so much attention right now is on the main team, as well as it should be because it's World Cup here, obviously, and the World Cup's coming up. That the U20 team that's actually been performing really well. I mean, they won a cup game, or sorry, they won a whole cup a few months ago, as well as
Mhm.
they performed decently at the most recent cup, and they won a friendly in this most recent window. So the team looks good. There's some pretty exciting names on that roster, but I think that's probably a better look if you're looking for this long term, because a lot of the World Cup pricing, at least in my opinion, seems pretty baked in on the starters.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to buy and hold long term for the current guys, it's probably just best to wait until after and see how it plays out, and then probably make your move. But like you said, the U20 guys aren't getting a ton of play, and when they did get a ton of play was a long time ago. Like I guess your Cade Cowles, your Caden Clarks, like they had a lot of hype a year ago. Now they're not doing much or a ton in the
Yep.
MLS to warrant it. So I do feel like that's a good, buy low and cross your fingers, see what happens, and have a good guy to root for.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the more speculative plays that eventually they will get called up to the main team. I mean, depending on how all goes well, but if they're in the U20s, it's likely at some point they'll get a shot with the team, and then you have a really obvious exit point.
No, yeah, it's definitely a risk, but it's a very low cost risk compared to what you could do with a lot of the current guys.
Yeah, definitely. And so from that, I'll go ahead and move into the last topic that I at least have written down here, which is thinking about vintage and pre-modern, specifically in regards to the U.S. men's national team. So I know that I talk a lot about pre-modern and vintage in my channel. I love pre-modern and vintage, and U.S. men's national team obviously has some pre-modern and vintage guys, but obviously they're not top 100, top 200 even players all time. So what are your thoughts on the guys like the Landon Donovans, the Clint Dempseys, the Tim Howards, and if you want to go further back, the more vintage guys in the United States men's national team? Do you think there's that regard for history and collecting those guys and seeing that as a long term sort of thing, or do you think this is the U.S. men's national team starts with the 2022 team?
So that's a hard one. It's something I internally debate a lot. It's one of those things where I feel like you're probably going to have to go for more of the off the wall type stuff or the very low supply stuff if you really want to make a long term play on it financially, because I don't know how many people are going to be willing to go back and look into. I mean, yeah, we talk about, Dempsey, Howard, Donovan is like the generation before. Now, I think those guys can have some love because a lot of the current fans, I feel like a lot of them know who they are, at least in terms of if I go on Twitter, the people on Twitter know who they are, right? Now, the average guy that'll come in this World Cup probably has no clue. So I do feel like there is this new segment that will grow out of this. Maybe they go back and learn, but I see it a lot the same way that I see like basketball vintage, where people don't really go back. Like they might buy it here and there as a good play in theory, but they don't really love it. So I feel like it's probably how cards should be more looked at, which is like a store value, and maybe, it holds, goes up a little bit, but I don't think you're gonna, notch it up to the next level. I do a little bit of it myself. Usually I'll go for either some very high, high value type cards that are very exclusive, or I'll just go for like very cheap on card autos of players. Like there's a lot of 94 World Cup cards that you can find that are signed, and you can find them for a few bucks. And for me, that's just fun to collect and have a good time. But I don't really look at that as a investment. I know there's vintage, like you got some Ting Halls from the US team that people look back on and they think those are pretty cool. I just don't know with that type of market how many, because if you're going back and buying 1930s US guys, like I struggle with it because I don't know how many people love the team like that. I feel like a lot of people just do it because they feel like it's their part in the market, like they should do it almost rather than they want to do it. And so for me, I would mostly stick to like Donovan, Dempsey, Tim Howard if you want to. Maybe pick another few guys just because those are actually relevant. And then beyond that, it should mostly just be for PC. At least that's how I look at it. I don't see a ton of long-term opportunity just because, I mean, as far as soccer in the US, like we know, it basically started in the 90s. It really didn't even exist before that. And I grew up in the US just as you did. And I mean, if I'm sure we both watch a ton of ESPN, like ESPN basically made a mockery of soccer. They just thought it was a funny thing where people flop and there's no score and there's no fun in it. And so I don't think there was a lot of people back then, and judging by the collectibles and everything the market has to offer from then, I mean, it's just not great. So in my opinion, I think it's fun. I think it's to collect. I don't think for a long-term investment that's where you want to put your money, though, by any means.
I actually think now this may be a demographics thing that I wholeheartedly agree with what you said there. I think the vintage side of the market, there could be something there just due to the rarity side, but at least me growing up in the United States, and I'm a guy that watched the 2002 team when I was really, really young. And then you watched obviously the 2010 team and you watched the 2014 team. And so those are the guys you really grew up on, but soccer history is not really a part of the culture. Like you don't grow up knowing the US men's national team players of the 50s, 60s, 70s, or God forbid before then. You know the vintage baseball guys. You might know some of the vintage basketball guys, but soccer is just not part of the culture in that way, at least when you go that far back in history. So if you didn't watch it in the World Cup, then you probably never even heard of it. Like there's no way I can name a single member of any United States men's national team prior to like the 90s. It's just it's not something that I was raised on, and it's not something that's common US knowledge. And so I worry about that from a demographic standpoint. I'm sure some people will respect the history and travel back and look at those things without having a necessarily an emotional attachment to them, but it's just not something that's really ingrained in our culture the way it is in other countries where they've been collecting stickers for 100 years, or they've been collecting album cutouts for 100 years, and soccer is so ingrained in a history aspect. In my view, I really think, at least as we turn this page, the 2022 World Cup team is going to be the team, depending on performance. Obviously, if we flame out, we flame out. But assuming they do what we think they're going to do, people are going to look back on this group as like the United States men's national team group as we go forward.
No, yeah, I could very well see that. I mean, for me personally, obviously I'm a big USMNT guy, but I'm still learning about it, right? I don't know all these guys. Like even the 90s team, even the 2000s team, like I might know 5, 7, 8 guys maybe off the team, but I don't know the team. Like, and especially if you go before that, I mean, as far as USMNT soccer is concerned, it started really with like Paul Caligiuri. He scored a goal that basically got us into the 90s World Cup, at which we then did something, right? And that wasn't even anything really. So up until the 90s, there was nothing. And even through the 90s, like we hosted the World Cup, but the World Cup's what launched MLS. Like there really was no love for soccer here. And even after that, it was a struggle. It wasn't like MLS launched and did amazing. I mean, even to this day, MLS is still, you know, basically a joke in terms of world soccer. So like,
it does make a lot of money though. I saw valuations came out recently on some of the MLS teams, and they're more valuable than some bottom tier Premier League clubs. It's crazy.
Yeah, the teams are valued very highly. I'm assuming a lot of that's future projections in the
Correct.
sense that, you know, we could eventually be good enough to where we can be involved with some of these bigger competitions. I think a lot of that has to deal with Americans having a lot of money. So there's a lot of rich people that are willing to throw it into something and because if you want to buy an NBA team or an NHL team or an NFL team, yeah, you can't do it. And if you can do it, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. So getting into MLS is like, it's kind of like cards, to be honest, in the sense that you and me are probably here because guess what? We can't afford 2003 LeBron James Topps Chrome refractors. Like we got to go another way. And
yeah, unfortunately, I can only get like like 3 or 4 Messi rookies for that in high grade.
Yeah, so it's like we have to make do with what we can, and I feel like that's the same thing with the MLS. Like it'll get there one day, but right now, I mean, I don't even, like I said, with the whole conversation about would you buy these guys an investment? I don't know if I'd buy Tim Howard, Clint Dempsey, Landon Donovan as an investment. I do think more people will be keen and clue into who they are, because I feel like as this team goes, you know, there'll be stories of the team before it and the team that, you know, kind of built it, but only to the point at which people know them. I don't know, just because you know someone, you're willing to go back and collect them, right? That takes a lot to get someone to go back and say, I'm going to put my money in these cards, especially when one of the problems I see with the US older stuff is there are guys that will go out and buy a lot of it and then try to resell it for a lot more, right? Just like a lot of people do in cards. But with the USMNT, it's particularly troublesome because there's no demand. Right? If you do that, you're basically scaring off the demand. Like who's going to buy that, right? If they can go buy a Yunus Musa rookie card numbered and watch him play, they'll do that before they're going to buy a Tim Howard auto from whatever year. You know, it's just, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But I love the guys. So personally, I enjoy them. I go after them. But yeah, I mean, from a US soccer perspective, I'm optimistic that the sport grows, but that's like almost a bet in and of itself. Like, we all think the sport's going to grow here. Will it? I mean, we all like to think so, but that's a gamble in and of itself. So I'm gambling on top of a gamble, and the more gambles you compound, it turns into a parlay, and usually it's losing odds. So that's kind of the way I look at it, really.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of every single conversation that I will ever get to, all the evidence will point to, hey, while we still can, literally just buy Messi, Ronaldo, Maradona, and Pele, and you're going to do better than thinking as hard as you possibly can about making all these different plays. You'll make it a lot more easy on yourself. It's going to be, maybe if you're not like super into those guys, a lot less fun. But if you're looking at this from a purely like money and long-term investment perspective, I don't see a better argument than just sticking to that and worrying about it in 30 years.
No, yeah, I was actually going to ask something about that, but just I guess in terms of, it was very coincidental because recently, the last few days, I was looking up NFL players because one of my buddies is an NFL guy, and I was just looking at like certain year, like red refractors and stuff like that. And so naturally, I'm like, oh, let's sort by high and see what's up there, right? See what high prices are that year. And the Tom Brady prices that you see on like any Tom Brady numbered stuff from any random year, it's so high. I watched the Soccer Study Sunday League and Trike that you guys all talked about the Messi KDB debate and all that type of stuff. Basically, like, would you rather buy a GOAT out in like a late year color, or would you rather buy a rookie of a more middling guy that's still a star but a middling guy? And at the time I was like, yeah, you want to buy the Messi. And now after looking at that, I'm like, you definitely want to buy the Messi. Like, Messi has a few years, he has so many years of Topps Chrome, and the early ones would be looked at great, in my opinion. And with a lot of these guys, at least with Ronaldo and Messi, they have so few of the numbered stuff with the way their career is going to work out. Like, they got 2014 and on, so there will be like 10 years maybe. That's half of what.
And when we say few, we mean few in comparison to football and basketball. We don't mean few as in there's not very many in total.
No, yeah, and that's sort of the problem that you get to, is like right now there's enough supply to quench the demand, but long term, if you truly believe in it, like, the market's going to look towards Messi, Ronaldo, and whatever, maybe Mbappe or Haaland if they become GOATs. But I feel like, in this whole talk of what we did this episode, talking about the World Cup, the USMNT, what I really am focusing on right now is just GOATs. Like, I've been buying a lot of Messi, a lot of Maradona, and a lot of those types of guys, because at the end of the day, I'm very long-term bull on soccer. Mm-hmm. And people talk about dollar cost averaging and that type of stuff as if you believe in something, you should continue to believe in it, basically, no matter where it's at almost. I mean, obviously you want to make your plays and whatnot, but for me, throughout this whole thing, I've been long-term bullish on soccer, and I'll continue to buy those guys, because when I look at these other sports, it's not close. It's not close. And like, what's my alternative, right? If I want to go collect another sport, all of them, at least from my perspective, are so much more worse and so much more expensive. And for me, it always just brings me back to soccer. So for the final point that I wanted to bring up, really, and just see what you think, is that, and what really grinds my gears, I probably should have brought it up in the earlier subject, but as far as soccer being lumped in with the alternative category of sports, I really get irked by that. And I feel like over time, hopefully I don't have to continue to be irked by that. But when I watch listen to podcasts, and I hear them lump soccer in with F1, WWE, UFC, and other sports of the like, I don't know if I'm just silly or if they're silly. That's one of the times in the market where you got to like look at yourself and be like, I'm not sure. But as far as soccer card collecting goes, or soccer sticker collecting, when you look back, like, there's a ton of it. And that's what we talked about earlier. It's so much to learn, right? If you want to learn F1, you learn Topps Chrome. Or if you really want to probably make money, you probably go back and learn the real stuff if you truly believe in that market. But the thing is like, I wondered this before, is I guess soccer wouldn't be in a better place long term, but in the short term, soccer might have been an amazing spot for a short-term flip if 2014 Prism would have stayed the set, right?
I 100% agree. Yep.
But the reason it couldn't is because there was too much other stuff that already existed. And so what I feel like happened in soccer is different than other sports, in the sense that what happened with soccer is a lot of people funneled into these same sets, these same exact cards, and it brought it up here. And then people were like, well, there are all these other ones that are way cooler, so we're going to disperse ourselves. And so it was this market that pumped, and then it seems like it dumped because it went down. But in reality, I feel like people went to other stuff, right? Because it made more sense and it worked out better. And so for me, I feel like soccer gets sort of falsely lumped into the category with everything else because their prices did go down. If you're looking from the outside, a lot of people see the PSA 10 Messi prices that happened, January, February of 2021. And they look at the prices now and they say, well, that market's, gone down a ton. It was a pump and dump. It's what it is, right? And that just hurts me because I know realistically it's not true. I was on Discord at the time. I didn't know about the vintage soccer card Discord, but I was in the sports card investor. Sorry, he's not collector.
Yep, I was in that for ground zero of the prison boom as well.
Yep, I was in there, and there wasn't a lot of people, right? There wasn't a lot of conversation. There was
specifically one guy that would post every single day about how Prism was the greatest set of all time, and he was proven so right over the course of a few weeks.
Goodness, but I mean, that's exactly it. It's like that was soccer card collecting at the time. We were in this universal Discord for a person that didn't even care about us, just in a subset of a random Discord, just having a little bit of fun. And now we can finally branch out and have our own Discords, and there's a whole community around it. And so for me, as someone that was in for a long time, I can see it go from basically, I guess, not nothing, but very little to a real substance behind it. And I find it hard to believe that you're seeing that in the other categories. I don't delve in them as much. I do buy a little bit of USC because I watch it a lot and I like the sport. But holistically, I don't think that any of the other alternative card markets have what we have. And I feel like it's important that people understand that. And you don't have to believe me. You just have to go out there and experience yourself. And I can't do that for you. But I think we're different. And I'd imagine you probably think the same,
Yeah, so for a few different reasons, I think that soccer is well ahead of those other alternative markets that usually get mentioned. The first one I would bring up is how big the soccer market already is. It's already the fourth biggest sports card market if you go by what's being graded by PSA. It's the fourth biggest, and it's at least I don't have the data right in front of me. I know it's fourth biggest, and I don't think it's all that close. I think hockey's a pretty distant fifth place behind it, and by distant I mean maybe like 30 or 40% less being graded. But that's a pretty big amount of cards not being graded for hockey, despite the fact that hockey has been a sports card market for a lot longer than soccer has. Now, soccer has been collected, there's been stickers, there's been magazine cutouts for 100 years plus now at this point. But in terms of soccer being valued, that's more of a very, very recent thing. But it does have the history aspect. It's in terms of modern, it's the fourth biggest one. In terms of where it is in the world right now, it is by far the biggest sport, and that's not even close or debatable. So of the alternative markets, I think it's the most defined, but still, I think it's very early as a sports card asset class when you compare it to a lot of the really well-defined ones. Like, we're not basketball, we're not baseball, we're not football, we're not even hockey in terms of like how long it's been around and how defined it is. But the potential, I think, is huge. And that's obviously why I continue to be so bullish on the market.
No, yeah. Part of what I struggle with is it worth debating other people about that? Like, because for me, whenever I tell people that soccer is different, right, it almost like, I don't know if it comes off as needy or begging, like, please validate me. But I don't know if it's worth convincing them or just let it happen naturally. Like, I don't know if I want to be the guy that's like, no, soccer is different. Like, hear me out. This is why. Or if I'm just like, brush it all off, let them do whatever. And what happens, happens. I don't know if it's worth it. And I don't know how you go about showing that to someone that doesn't understand it. I don't know if you can.
I think the people that will get it will get it. I mean, the number of passionate soccer fans that are out there far outnumber any other sport, almost even combined. That's how big soccer is. And so I think eventually, organically or inorganically, if influencers get involved, we're going to see that growth, and those people will enter this market and they'll see the real value in it, whether that be from a collecting basis or an investment when you start looking at populations in soccer versus some other sports. I think, assuming it grows as we think it will and as we hope it will, the opportunity, I think, is obviously there.
No, yeah, and I think that's another thing that you mentioned there is the passion behind soccer fans. I don't know it. Well, I know it now because I've been introduced to it, but I didn't know it as a kid. Like, personally, where I'm from, like, you usually root for the teams that are around you, and that's about as passionate as it gets. It's like, oh, if they're in my state, I'll root for them, and they're probably my team. But some people are diehards, but no one, like, nowhere in America are they singing during a game, do they have chants for specific players that they have all their own guy? Like, soccer is fundamentally different in terms of how much people love it. Now, does that connect to collecting cards? Who knows? But I do love that a lot. And I do miss that whenever I watch US, sporting events now. And even when we watch the USMNT, they have no chance. Like the most they'll do is like a USA chant or I believe that we'll win or,
They are working on that though. I will say, watching games on TV, and then I went to the match in Orlando against Panama. That really is growing in terms of the supporter base for the United States men's national team. And so I think specifically with this group of guys, we could really see it start to take off, assuming we do well. But you're right. It's nothing like it is overseas.
Oh yeah, but yeah, I mean, I guess I bring it back to that's what I love about the soccer card market is you can tell people are passionate. Like whenever I looked at other card markets, because whenever I got in, probably just like you look at everything, right? You want to see what makes sense and where you want to go, and you look at that. And with soccer, it was so organic the way it grew, in my opinion. A lot of the people that are in soccer, they're into trading card games, which, in my opinion, if you're into trading card games, you're more likely a collector than if you aren't, right? And people are very dedicated to teams, players, more so than I see elsewhere. And that's what really gives me a lot of belief, not one, just the community growing, but also the passion in terms of what people focus on, right? With a lot of the, basketball collectors, since that's the most hype driven market, in my opinion, it's just all over the place. But in soccer, it really fills me with a lot of belief. And no matter how the World Cup goes and post World Cup, I still have the same long-term beliefs that I had a year ago, in the sense that everything's sort of playing out in a great way. And it gives me a lot of confidence despite the economic downturn and the card downturn that we're seeing.
Yep. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And like I said earlier in this conversation, specifically, the soccer card market post World Cup could go down 30 or 40%. It could even go down 50 or 60%, even in vintage and pre-modern. That doesn't change my thesis at all. I'm still very, very optimistic in more of the 5, 10, 15, 20-year outlook. And as opposed to I am in other sports, I just think there's so much potential for it that I'm really not concerned with what happens in these next few months. In fact, I look at that as possibly a good potential buying opportunity. But I love what I see in the data as well as the people in the market that are actually collectors and actually are looking at this long term. I think it just makes a lot of sense.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, for me, I have a lot more optimism with the long-term soccer card market than I do the short-term USMNT player pool. So it's great, even if one side's down, the other side gets me bright-eyed and joyful. So I'm loving it.
Yeah, exactly. And just to bookend one conversation that we touched on briefly earlier, we brought up the much talked about Messi blue refractor versus KDB or Iniesta rookie sticker debate. I just want to clear up my position on that because, like Andre, I went back and I watched the tape and I did some more research diving into it. And my official take on it will be that if they are the same price, I would prefer the Messi. But in the case of the video that was talked about, it was a 2018 blue Messi Chrome card, which is like a couple $100 card, and the Iniesta, the Iniesta specifically that was brought up is like a $2,000 or $3,000 card. So obviously, I would take the Iniesta. But assuming they are the same price, I would much prefer the Messi because of the reasons that we talked about. And I guess I'll close with this. I really think that the best opportunity on the market right now is in those four goats while they're still at attainable prices. I mean, heck, Messi rookies are still only a couple $100 depending on which ones you go for. Ronaldo is much more difficult because he only has a couple rookies, but and even there's some Pele issues in the 1960s that are less than $100. And so I think if you're looking at the ultramodern side of the market where those price points don't even get you like a gold refractor for some of these prospects, there's some interesting things out there to look at.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like you mentioned with that example in particular, it was a little faulty. But if you gave me like a Messi card that's worth 2,000 or a KDB that's worth 3,000, I might even take the Messi there. Yes. And so I will take a discount. I won't take the massive discount that was offered up in that situation.
Yeah.
But I do get it. And yeah, I mean, I agree. And what kind of gets me messed up is sometimes you look back at other markets and you can tell that even like you mentioned with the Pele 60 stuff, like it's pretty low pop will obviously get higher, but even then when you look at other goats and other sports and what their later year stuff does and how high pop it is compared to soccer, the opportunity is still quite a lot in that position too, like with Pele or with whoever it is. I mean, whatever goat, even if you're buying like, I mean, I know you and Andre and a lot of the pre-modern crowd are into Ronaldo and Messi inserts and refractors or whatever it may be, and I think that type of stuff's amazing too. I mean, I think there's so many opportunities that despite whatever may happen these few months, you can still always have fun in the soccer card market. While with many of the other card markets, I don't feel the same way. Like if I want to go build a LeBron PC, it's not going to be a fun one, and it's going to be expensive if I want to make it even a little fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be an arduous task for you to even determine which LeBron card you want.
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as that goes, yeah, I feel like I'm in a great spot, and the market's in a great spot. And despite what happens here, it should be a ton of fun. And yeah, no matter where the market goes, the next couple months will be a ton of fun. And if you want to buy now, buy after, buy whenever, long term, we have the same beliefs. So
yeah, exactly. And
hard to really go too.
I'll repeat the line that I said in the conversation that I had with Seth a few days ago. This is the best time of year to be a soccer fan, and even a United States men's national team soccer fan. I mean, we have the World Cup coming up in less than 50 days. We have the Champions League is going to be really tuning up. We're going to have Europa League matches all over the place for the next couple months. So this literally is the best time to be involved in the sport. And so look forward to it and enjoy it. Before we go, last check here. Who do you have winning the World Cup if you had to pick one team right now? And then looking a little bit more forward, who do you like in the Champions League this season?
So, I mean, I guess Champions League, we'll get that out of the way. I'm going to go chalk just with Man City.
Mhm.
I feel like, I mean, with the Haaland edition, as a Gio Reyna stan, I watched a lot of Haaland. So, I mean, as did most people, but at Dortmund, he looked amazing and fitting right in at Man City. I don't see how that really goes wrong, especially when you have teams like Bayern that are struggling quite a lot this year. And with a lot of the other teams, there's a lot of question marks, even with Liverpool and stuff like that. So Man City's just chalk, and I take that. For World Cup, I feel like it's South American World Cup one way or the other. I'm going to choose to go Argentinian because I love Messi, and I feel like that team holistically has gotten a lot better and works a lot more towards Messi's strengths, and they don't ask as much out of him as prior teams. While Brazil, I feel, is also a really good shout, but given that they're the favorites and also that they have players that I don't necessarily love, I'm not gonna be rooting for them, and I wouldn't take them. I guess if you gave me a free bet, I would take Brazil, but if you're giving me the odds bet, I would take Argentina and go with them, since I think a Messi World Cup would be a beautiful way to end a career. So that's what I'll choose to root for.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been talking about Argentina, Brazil ever since like a year ago. I think those are the two, at least in my opinion, clear favorites to win this. I was listening to a podcast recently, and they brought up that Argentina is currently running a 35 match or something like that unbeaten streak. Now that doesn't include draws. Obviously, they've taken draws in those 35 matches, but they haven't lost in 35 matches. I think that's, if that's a true stat, and I was listening to a correct podcast, that's an insane thing to think about as they go into the World Cup here. So, I mean, they won Copa America over Brazil, so I really like that team. And then Brazil obviously is going to be the other favorite, and they probably have the best collection of talent, whereas the positions don't really line up in the way that Argentina's do. Brazil has so much attacking talent. They obviously can't play at all. But yeah, I think either of those teams, if I had to pick one, I think I would choose Brazil just because I don't know how anyone's going to slow them down in terms of goal scoring. But I like Argentina as well. If I had to pick somebody that's not in South America, I actually don't know where I would go. I'm not super high on France right now. I'm not high on England I don't think anyone's really high on England with Southgate managing them. And so I really don't know where to go if it's not one of the South American teams.
No, it's probably that's why I went South American too, is because you don't really know what to do. Like there's no Italy. With Spain, it's obviously a down cycle. You don't have like mega stars coming out of there. With Germany, they're in the same sort of spot where they're a younger team than they usually are. And with England, obviously they've had a ton of struggles. And with France is like the one team that you could count. Like if you're going to go European, I feel like it's got to be France. But even then, you don't feel great about it, and you have some question marks that you might not have elsewhere. So in my opinion, Brazil or Argentina, one or the other, but I think either way, it should be a fun World Cup in the sense that it seems very competitive. Not that it isn't in other years, but there's not a clear cut, I wouldn't say by any means.
Yeah, for me, it's the storylines in this World Cup are just so intriguing, especially when you line up the fact that the two favorites, it might not be by Vegas odds, but at least in my opinion, the two favorites, Neymar winning it for Brazil is a huge deal. Messi winning it for Argentina is obviously the biggest deal for his entire career, and probably one of the biggest deals in soccer history if he's able to accomplish that. So I just think that's such a poetic ending, no matter what it ends up being. And even on the other side, if Mbappe wins another World Cup, we're going to start talking about him. Can he win 3? Can he win 4? Ronaldo could win it for Portugal. There's just so many great storylines this year.
Oh yeah, it'll be a ton of fun. I mean, you always got to wonder with Ronaldo, like, will he make another World Cup? Club situation wise, it doesn't seem great. But and also US situation wise is kind of questionable. But nonetheless, there are a ton of great storylines. And I do agree that no matter who you go in rooting for or watching for, there will be a ton of fun things that can take place. And really, that's the selling point of this World Cup, is that almost anything can happen. There's stars everywhere, and it'll be a ton of fun. As far as what'll happen, obviously no one knows, but I can't imagine it'll be a bad time. And I also think that the card market does somewhat well, despite, the situation economically. Like, when there's that much fun going on in a market, it's hard to ignore it. Even if you want to, it's really hard. And I've been seeing some basketball people start to get into soccer, even though they don't really like it. But that's even before the World Cup. I feel like once the World Cup comes around, I'm not a big speculator on young guys, so I have no narrative to push here. But I mean, other than USMNT, but that, we might go out in group stage, so it doesn't matter. But holistically, I think that, it'll be a ton of fun. And that's why I do worry a little bit after the World Cup. But going into this, it'll be great. And I'm really looking forward to it. And only less than 2 months away. It feels like something we've all been waiting for a while. So it'll be a great little bookend to it.
Yeah, no, it's going to be, I literally cannot wait until we get underway there. We're just about 2 months away from the first few matches, and then that makes it just about 3 months away until Pulisic raises the trophy. So it's going to be a great few months coming up here. So I thank you so much for joining me on the content creator chat podcast type thing we got going on today. So if you want to do a little sign off, let people know where they can find you, or if you had any other closing statements you wanted to give, feel free. Floor is yours.
No closing statements. Just hope you guys enjoy the card market no matter what happens. You can always check me out on YouTube. I'm sure there'll probably be links below, I'd imagine. I'm on YouTube, Instagram. That's really where I focus now. Eventually, I'll branch out and do other things. But as for now, hopefully you guys enjoy the card market. I'll have a ton of fun, and the World Cup will be great. And I do appreciate you for having me on. It's always fun to talk and chat cards, because as much as we all talk on Discord and Instagram and all that stuff, we don't really get a ton of opportunities to, chat and have this type of conversation. So I had a ton of fun, and I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no, I'm sure we'll do some more content in the future, especially as we move into the World Cup. Maybe we'll have to do some post-match celebrations if we ever do something really cool. But yeah, no, I appreciate having you on, and we'll look forward to what we got coming up here in October, November, and December.
No doubt. I'm excited.